What's up, guys? Welcome to Broke and Stressed, a PT student podcast where we talk about our lives as broke and stressed physical therapy students. Throughout grad school, you'll come to find that the struggles that you're having happen all the time to thousands of students across the country. You are not alone. In this podcast, we'll share our personal stories and walk you through how we overcame some of our own struggles. I'm your host, Ruben. Let's have some fun, have some good conversation, and let's get into the episode. Hey guys, welcome back to Broken Stress. Today we have my good friend Jess, who's my classmate on the podcast with us. Say hello, Jess.
Hey.
So Jess, like I was saying, we're both in our clinicals right now. Jess was fortunate enough to have a clinical this summer as well as one in the fall. But before we get started talking about clinicals and stuff like that, Jess, why don't you share an embarrassing story of yourself from PT school or even clinicals?
So this is from PT school. I think we were in our later half of our first year. It was our cardio palm class, or it was actually a class where our cardio palm teacher was guest lecturing in, and he taught us how to use a stethoscope. And for some reason, I either zoned out or I don't even know what happened because I remember hearing it, but I just couldn't remember it when I was actually doing the practical. But when it came time to practice my stethoscope skills, like I had to raise my hand and be like, hi, can you teach me how to do this again? And it was so bad because he's like so knowledgeable about that, and like he just gave me a look, and then my partner gave me a look, and I'm like, oh boy. But we just moved on. It's okay.
Yeah, he does have that kind of persona where you're like, wow, I do not want to embarrass myself in front of him.
Yeah, and you just want to impress him.
I remember we had a lab. What was it? Remember that simulated lab that we had in the nursing building?
Oh yeah.
So I was the first person to go in my group, and I had no idea what we were doing. I don't think we ever practiced either. Dude, yeah, and he was like, all right. And he was like my proctor, quote unquote, or whatever. And he's like, all right, Ruben, you're up. And I was like, what do I do? So that was really embarrassing for me. It's like, oh, you just do what you normally do. I'm like, I don't know how to do anything. So that was embarrassing. That was like a fun time.
But hey, we're here.
We're here. So Jess, in the summer you had a 7-week clinical. It was a little shortened because of COVID. So talk to us a little bit about what that clinical was like.
So it was an outpatient ortho clinic. It was manual therapy based, and everything was weird because it's not like how your normal clinicals would go, because one, it's shortened, and two, it's during a global pandemic. Like I never thought we would spend our clinicals in a global pandemic. And so they had like all these precautions we had to take, and we had, like, for example, we did our orientation mostly over online. Like I'm sure you are, because me and Ruben actually got placed at the same outpatient ortho clinic, but he's doing it right now, and I just finished it a couple of weeks back. And so we did our orientation over online. Usually they do it the day of, and then when we go into the clinic, like we had to practice social distancing, and they had only a certain number of therapists could come in, only certain patient populations that were prioritized were able to come in, and then we still had to follow social distancing, and we had face masks on. And it was always such a surprise when people took off their face masks. And I think that's basically all the protocol. Oh, and we were allowed to wear scrubs even in an outpatient ortho clinic. Did I catch everything in terms of like COVID stuff?
Yeah, I think you did. That sounds pretty much exactly like how my orientation went.
But other than that, it's the overall clinical was very, very educational, very intense. And I learned a lot from it, but it was just kind of hard to get hands-on practice because of one, COVID, and two, when we were able to, like, you had to capitalize on everything. So I honestly felt like even if I lost sleep, I always took the time out of my day to do more research outside or take advantage of every opportunity thrown at me, because I knew I only had so much time, because 7 weeks, it sounds like a lot, but it really flies by pretty quick.
Yeah, I definitely agree. Like, I'm only 2 weeks in, guys, and It's pretty intense. Like I definitely feel like it takes up most of my day. And even like outside of normal working clinic hours, I do, like Jess was saying, I do feel obligated to like do some chart review for the next day, do some research, like, to develop your best practices for how you treat patients. It's like, it doesn't seem like it's ending. And I think, so this clinical has that reputation of being really difficult, right?
Right.
It being super difficult, but I think I like that because the challenge is what makes you a better therapist. Like that, people say it's hard, but you come out a better PT, better student PT, whatever out of it. And I think I'm thankful for that, for being here.
100%. Like, even though it was hard, I definitely would recommend it because I think it's made me a better therapist. It gave me a good foundational set and way to approach treatment to patients that I don't think I had before I got in there. And just because something's like hard doesn't mean it's not worth it, Like, you're definitely going to be a better therapist just going there.
Yeah,
And it's great because it's a teaching hospital. So they always try to make sure the students get a good experience.
definitely. So what things do you think your CI did in that clinical, your summer one, that really helped foster your growth and your learning as a student?
Oh yeah, so one of the other things that made this clinical different than regular clinicals before COVID is that I had 3 CIs basically. Um, so I learned different things from each therapist that I worked with, but what they had in common was, one, like if we ever had any downtime, they were always down to like help me learn some manual skills or practice that, or to like go over some concepts that we either glossed over in PT school or I needed some review on. Like I had a vestibular specialist as my primary CI, and just getting her input and experience on how to treat patients with vestibular disorders really enlightened me, because like I never thought I would progress patients exercises like that, or like give them those types of exercises, and then even approaching it in a functional manner, because you're taught like the basic balance exercises, but how do you do it in a functional manner? That was really cool. And then with my other two, they're more orthopedic based, but they taught me like Maitland and like a little bit of Mulligan techniques, or at least approaches to treatment, that I think helped a lot. Because I don't know why, but whenever I'm faced with a patient in front of me, I just remember better what I do with them rather than if I were just to go over a clinical case study in class. So it just solidified things, and they are always free or down to like let me try things. They're open to feedback, and like they gave me feedback when I asked for it, and like even even when they noticed stuff that I didn't notice at first, and they were just so very welcoming to anything and everything that I had to say and what they could do to better my experience.
I think one thing that's been hard though, I think just so far, is so right after Jess finished her clinical and in between when I started mine, because I started mine a little bit later than the rest of my classmates who did this fall, is that the hospital switched into a completely different medical record system, which I'm gonna be honest, they said it was gonna be easy and stuff. It seems less intuitive than what they let it on to be. So, did you have any issues with your medical record system? I feel like yours was. I've used that one before, and it was pretty seamless. Like I didn't have any issues with it.
I think it was seamless in the fact that they've been doing it for so long that they know how to help you through it, and like they already had their templates, and like they they had their systems, and so they knew how to apply and teach those systems to others. But definitely that one electronic medical system was just, it was freeform. First of all,
Yeah.
it was so long, like all the documentation requirements you had to do for it, but as long as you found your system, you'd be fine. But now with like the new one, I use it right now with my current clinical, and it's easier, but it's also harder in some ways, in that there are just some things I wish I could copy and paste from like every other,
Yes.
what's it called? Every other note that I've done, because like they're pretty similar, at least in like what areas to fill out. So there's like pros and cons to it.
And I think the fact that there's a bit of a learning curve has
Yeah.
made my clinical a little rough, because sometimes there are days where me and my CI are just focused on, all right, how do I write this note? Just administrative stuff as opposed to like learning and patient care. And it's a little annoying, but luckily we've had a decent cancel rate, so we've had enough time to work on that administrative stuff.
That's a good and bad thing.
Yeah, it's a good and bad thing, but it's played out okay so far. Hopefully, by the time like week 3 comes around, we're all golden.
Hopefully.
Yeah. So how would you compare? So talk to us now about the clinical you're at now.
So I'm at an inpatient acute setting in the hospital in the city. And it's also a teaching hospital. So they're also very focused on their students, providing a good learning environment, and everyone's so open to your questions and like whatever you may need to succeed. And so I really like that environment. So it was easy to translate from my previous one to my current one in terms of like environments to learn in, because I think that's one of the things you have to consider about your clinicals is like, what's the work environment like? And if it's not the most welcoming, it kind of makes the clinical harder. But just the difference between the two settings, one of the things I appreciate about inpatient is that there's a better work-life balance. If I'm scheduled from 7:30 to 4, I'm scheduled from 7:30 to 4, and I've only had to stay max of 30 minutes after to finish like documentation. And like I don't have the chart review for the next day. But with outpatient, like I'm not expected, but like if you have stuff to do, you're expected to do it, even if it's not technically required afterwards. And so I just felt like I had to do a lot more research and chart reviewing after hours and documenting. And outpatient, like you're faced with a lot of no-shows. We've talked about this. Whereas in the hospital, like they're there, like you can get refused, but like, you know, they're still going to be there.
Yeah, and I really like, so guys, if you were first time listeners, so I actually had an inpatient rotation for my first one a long time ago for 2 weeks. It was a little bit shorter than the ones me and Jess are doing now, but yeah, I do agree. Like the work-life balance is nice, and the fact that you kind of work your own schedule. You know, you see patients kind of based on when you feel. You can just wander around the hospital and like see patients, and then come back later after your lunch. It's kind of nice. That freedom is really nice.
It is. Like I like making my own schedule. But one of the things I've also really noticed about working in the inpatient setting is that I think half the job of being an acute care therapist is communication, because you have to know how to like develop that rapport with the patient, because obviously like they're in the hospital and they're probably not going through like the best of times. And like everyone has like different personalities, and knowing how to connect to a patient can help you actually do the therapy that they need. Because if they refuse you, you're blocked by that. Or if they're not motivated to do anything, then it's hard to get anything out of the session for them. But knowing how to communicate, knowing how to like reach them, connect to them, and speak to them goes a long way. And that's like half the battle. If you're able to do that, then like you're in a good setting.
Yeah, definitely. And that's when also a big component that you made me think of is empathy, because, you know, your patients are in the hospital. I'm sure they're like going through some stuff mentally, and they're not in a good place, and they're just really need your support. And I think that's definitely more prevalent in inpatient, because you're in the hospital, whereas the outpatient, you go somewhere.
Right. I actually had like a couple of patient encounters that like really made me love the job, or at least felt like I was doing something that mattered to them. Like I had one patient and he unfortunately was spending the hospital on his birthday. And so I saw him first thing in the morning and he speaks
Oh,
Spanish.
man.
So when I knocked on his door, I sang actually happy birthday to him in Spanish. And he looked so happy that
Oh,
he actually started crying. And he's
oh
like,
no.
so much like, no one does this for me. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, but you deserve it. It's your birthday. And then like, he was able to do a lot more with therapy. He looked happy during it. And then like, just the way he said thank you and the look in his eyes made me feel like I really connected with him. And then with the other one, like this lady, she was not having a happy time in the hospital. She had some history of alcohol abuse, and she had like severe jaundice, and occupational therapy worked with her earlier. And occupational therapy told me that this girl was not willing to like walk. And so knowing that, when I went into the room, like after they worked with her, like one of the things I did to like help motivate her was just, I asked her like, hey, after the introductions, like, what's something that makes you happy? Or like, what's something that you like to talk about that makes you happy? And it was her dog. And once I got her started talking about her dog, like she actually was like moving and doing stuff, even though she told occupational therapy she wasn't gonna do it. And so like after the session, she said, thank you for coming. It really meant a lot. And I'm like, oh, this is what I love. This is like making me feel like I'm here. This is my field. I'm going for it.
Jess, that's some next level stuff. I like that a lot. I might steal that.
Do it. Provide that patient care.
So when you were found out you were going to an inpatient clinic, so when I think of inpatient, I was kind of intimidated because our program focuses a lot on inpatient, and you kind of, when you think inpatient, you think like, oh, patients are really sick. You know, their functional level is very decreased compared to a normal person. There's a bunch of lines and tubes, you know,
Right.
and like it's kind of intimidating at first. So do you still feel that way, or how did you overcome that feeling? Like what are your thoughts going in, and how has that changed?
So when I first started, before I even knew like what inpatient was, like even though we had our clinical like visits and experiences during our semesters, I just didn't think I had a clear enough idea of what it was. So like I was just intimidated by like the fact that I had to like memorize all these lab values and like know all these conditions and be prepared to face all of them. But a lot of times these patients have all the diseases and conditions at the same time. So I just felt like I'm not prepared. Like I think I need more time. But when I actually went into it, like everyone there is like working towards your success as long as you put in the work. And so like they didn't start us off in like in the MICU or like the medical ICU. They give us like a general med floor, or like they don't start us off with patients that have so many lines and tubes and like you have to like monitor all the vials at the same time. They start you off with like your average acute care patient, and then your CI gives you more supervision in the beginning, but as you progress, like they give less and less as like you start to like gain more competence and like experience. And so like with that in mind, like as I grew as a therapist, like my CI gave me less supervision, especially with people that she was familiar with me treating. And so they help foster your confidence in treating patients. And I think that's really helped. And now I don't feel so scared of inpatient, but I'm definitely going to be a lot more nervous if I go start working in the ICU, which I haven't yet, but I've seen like one day observation.
So now that you've had a taste of both inpatient and outpatient, what are you thinking about in terms of long-term career placement? Like, are you leaning more one way versus the other? I know it's a little early to say that, like, you know, we haven't even graduated yet, but are you thinking one way more towards the other?
I've actually been thinking about that a lot recently, especially since graduation hopefully is in May. I was like, man, what do I want to get into? Because like you said, I experienced both. And I'm like, I still don't know yet. Like I love aspects of both. And if you get into one setting, it's easier to like lose your practice or skill sets in the opposite or different setting. And I kind of want to keep both skill sets that I've got from it. So it's just something that I still need to figure out what I want to do. But honestly, with the job market as it is, probably the job that's offered to me with like, give me the value that I'm worth, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's available.
Yeah. So I think it's even possible in the future to like take on roles in both, right? You could work one part-time
Right.
while you're doing another full-time.
Do like a
So
PRN kind of deal.
yeah.
Yeah, I've actually been considering that, especially since I don't know what I want to do specifically yet.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's a good idea. What about you?
I'm leaning more towards outpatient. I've always led a little leaned. I've always leaned a little more towards outpatient, but I really enjoyed my inpatient or clinical. I think I've said this a million times, but like I would not mind working in inpatient for a year or a couple years. Like I really enjoyed it, and yeah, I really had fun with it, and I really could see the value that I provide to the patients there. So I could see it going either way, but like I said, I'm leaning more towards outpatient, probably long term end goal kind of thing.
Yeah, I definitely see that. I think you'd be a great outpatient therapist.
Oh, thanks, Jess. I think it could be good either way. I feel like I could see you doing either. That's
Thanks.
why I was interested to see where you were leaning more towards. Food, porque no los dos. Do both. So Jess, now that you have a couple clinical experiences under your belt, why don't you provide the listeners, whether they're PTs or not, students or not, some advice, whether you're going into, let's start off with outpatient clinic, outpatient internship, then an inpatient, then just any general advice for a student about to go into clinicals.
Great question. So for outpatient, I definitely, or actually for both of them, I would recommend making goals for yourself. So not only does it help you target what you want to work on, but also helps you make or track your progress. And if you find yourself you're not meeting your goals, you start asking yourself like, well, why am I not? And that's a component of self-reflection, which is too something that you should practice in both. Like, what am I doing that's not helping me become a better therapist? So 1, make goals, 2, self-reflect. And then now specifically for outpatient, be willing to put in the work. Because even though like we went to, or I went to, and you're now attending a clinical that's known for being difficult, I've talked to a lot of our classmates in outpatient settings, and they're similarly spending lots of time outside of outpatient clinics doing work. And so not being afraid to like do the grind, rise and grind kind of deal. And then I think practice, especially for outpatient, like, and differential diagnosis, because practice your manual skills, get better with like differential diagnosis. Because one thing that I was not used to in the beginning with evaluations in like outpatient ortho was not only trying to figure out what's going on with your patient, but also giving them treatment at the same day or in the same session. And you're like, like what can I do now to like help them immediately when I'm still trying to figure out what the heck is going on? And so once you have that down, it's easier to do. But when you're still trying to figure out like, oh, what do I do? And then you're also like running out of time, it's just a lot to handle. But other than that, I think that's my deal for outpatient. And then for inpatient, be open to facing anything and everything. Like if your CI recognizes that like you're willing to be thrown into like all these situations, like you're going to be provided a rich environment to learn from. And then be good with like communicating or like providing empathy and knowing how to be a good listener, because patients feel valued when they feel like they're being listened to. And that's patient first care right there. And I think that's it for now. Oh, and like know your discharge options. Like a big component of inpatient is like knowing where to send your patient after they get out of the hospital, and like having a good base of knowledge and like what the discharge options are helps you with patient education. So yeah.
I think another good thing too, to kind of add on to what Jess was saying, was like when you're treating your patient and their impairments, you want to think big picture. You want to think functionally and relate it back to them. Like, what are their goals when they're done with therapy? Like that can be related inpatient or outpatient. Let's say you're treating a teenager or an adult and they want to get back to playing sports, in an outpatient, or if you're treating a person inpatient and they have a bunch of stairs at home, you want to make sure that you're training stairs so that you're not worried about their functionality at home when they have stairs without a handrail. You want to always link back to what can I help the patient with big picture wise after they're done.
Mm-hmm.
So
I like
always, yeah. I just thought about that just now. So
yeah.
I'm a genius. So
Even in outpatient, inpatient, everything's focused on like functionality and relating it back to the patient.
Yeah, like you got to make sure everything, just think big picture, guys.
Right.
Cool. And then just to kind of end things off, what are some general tips that you have for anyone out there that's struggling through PT school now amidst this COVID pandemic?
I honestly, kudos to the students who are going through PT school during this pandemic. I know
Yeah.
seniors now that are going through it, and I'm like, wow, I don't think I can handle this. This is a lot. Like, one of our friends told me that she had to buy her own massage table, and like a lot of the other second years had to, because they actually can't use the labs. And I'm like, well, that kind of sucks if you can't use the plinths. And
That does suck.
like a big part of like MSK class or musculoskeletal and like learning your outpatient skills is like practicing on different bodies, but you're like confined to like a certain number of people.
I can't even imagine what they're going through amidst these times, like, especially starting PT school.
Right.
Like, I don't know. We were fortunate enough, like you said, to finish off didactic. And yeah.
It's just a lot of Zoom calls with a lot of people and arranging like schedules so you all can meet up.
Yeah.
One thing though is to like remember to keep connected to people, because I know when we were still doing some classes during the early part of COVID, or probably the peak, it was easy to just kind of isolate yourself because you were forced to, and so that kind of just made it harder to like maintain friendships and like relationships. And it's just already kind of hard to do in PT school when you prioritize it. So finding the work-life balance again is even harder.
Yeah, I definitely think that it's nice to be able to socialize with your classmates and hang out and know that, you're all in it together, for lack of non-cliche phrasing. Like, it's nice to be like, yeah, like that exam sucked. Let's go have a beer together. But like being able to Zoom call with each other,
Yeah, 100%.
Cool.
Yeah.
And I think that's gonna be everything for today's podcast, guys. I want to thank you guys for listening, and thank you, Jess, for hopping on.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for doing all of this too.
No problem. We'll see you guys in the next episode. Make sure to keep tuning in. Love you guys. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks, guys, for tuning in to today's episode of Broke and Stressed. If you enjoyed the podcast, make sure to smash that follow or subscribe button to get notified whenever new episodes are released. If you want to connect with me on social media, you can find me on YouTube or Instagram. Thanks again, guys, for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.